Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here at the Intent Hockey channel. Today we've got a few things to discuss, including a couple more entry-level contract signings for a few players, some more injury updates from around the NHL, and I'm going to take a look at what could happen for the San Jose Sharks and the Chicago Blackhawks in the offseason, as both teams have now been eliminated from playoff contention. With all that coming up right now. Hello, and welcome to another video here at the Internet Hockey Channel. Now, I'll start things off today with a few signings that have happened from around the NHL. These ones are all, once again, entry-level contracts, young players getting new contracts for the NHL. We'll start with the Florida Panthers, as they have signed 2022 third-round left-shot defenseman Marek Alscher to a 3-year entry-level contract that will begin at the start of next season and have a cap hit of $897,000. Now for Alscher, he's done okay in the WHL this year. Last year had a pretty good season, putting up 7 goals and 16 points in 61 games. Not the best, but he did have a pretty decent season. This year, same sort of thing, has 7 goals and 15 points, 57 games, so only 1 less point in the 4 less games. So he hasn't done all too bad this year. I would expect Alscher to probably remain in the juniors for the next year or two, and then eventually turn pro and go into the AHL and play a couple of years there. So I think it's still a few years away before Alscher challenges for a roster spot, but I think in time he could be a good third pair defenseman for the Panthers. I think that's reasonable to say. And the Panthers must see something in him if they wanted to sign him to an entry-level contract. So I think signing Alscher is a really good deal for the Panthers. Like I said, it probably won't be challenging for a roster spot in the next couple of years, but I think in time he can definitely be a good third pair defenseman. And although he still has some more growing to do, I think this is a really good signing for the Panthers. And I think this could possibly be a home run hit in the third round for the Florida Panthers. Over with the Chicago Blackhawks, they signed 2 players. First, they signed Ryder Rolston to a 3-year entry-level contract. They'll have a cap hit of $895,000 and begin at the start of next season. Now, Rolston was a 5th-round pick of actually the Colorado Avalanche. He was traded to the Chicago Blackhawks along with Josh Dickinson by the Colorado Avalanche a couple of years ago for Carl Soderberg. And that was just a small deal, but obviously the Hawks definitely feel like he has some potential. He was a 5th-round pick a couple of years ago, so it's good to see that he got an NHL contract. He'd been playing over in college in the NCAA, and he's actually done pretty well. Last year, he had a pretty decent season, putting up 10 goals and 27 points in 38 games. Not the best, but definitely a really, really good season for him. One of his better seasons over in college. This year, not as productive. Only 7 goals and 20 points in 27 games, so hasn't been as productive. But I definitely think Rolston can definitely be a good add for the Chicago Blackhawks. And he can play any of the forward positions, so he's a really versatile forward. Yeah, he'll probably come over from college now. I would think he'll play in a couple years in the AHL just to get a feel for pro-level hockey, and then eventually he'll go to the NHL. So I definitely think in time, maybe 2-3 years down the road, he could definitely be a good bottom 6 forward for the Hawks. So really good signing for Chicago, and I'll expect him to continue to do really well. And they also signed left-shot defenseman Wyatt Kaiser to a 3-year entry-level contract. They'll have a cap hit of $917,000, and in this case, the contract will start this year. So for Kaiser, he's done really well. He's been playing over in college, once again in the NCAA, for the Chicago Blackhawks. Definitely improved from last year after he had 2 goals and 19 points in 35 games last year. He's already had 5 goals and 23 points in 35 games this year in college. So definitely good for Kaiser. He's already also gone into an NHL game for the Blackhawks. He didn't put up any points, but it does seem like he's going to get a shot at the NHL over the next little while. I would expect he probably starts on the minors next year, and he'll probably play there, I think, for at least the first few games of the season for next year. But in time, I do think Kaiser could be a really good fit on the Blackhawks blue line. He was a 2020 third-round pick, so it seems that they could have a really good steal in the 3rd round from the 2020 draft for the Hawks. I think in time, I think Kaiser, whether it be next year or the year after, could definitely be a good third pair of defenseman. So another good deep prospect for the Hawks. As I say, another couple young good players in Rolston and Kaiser. And then the last one is the big one that has happened over the last little while, as Jaden Struble has signed a 2-year entry-level contract with the Montreal Canadiens that will begin at the start of next season and have a cap hit of $868,000. Now, Struble was a 2nd-round pick back in the 2019 draft by the Montreal Canadiens, so he's definitely been playing college for quite a while now. The Canadiens were waiting for him to finish up his college career, and he's finally done that. So good to see Struble get signed. It's another good young defender to add to the Canadiens' decor. It's another good left shot one as well. He's been playing over in college as well. Hasn't been very productive. Only had 3 goals and 14 points in 34 games last year. This year, a little bit worse with a goal and 12 points in 31 games this year. So 2 less points, 3 less games for Struble. But definitely, he's still done really well over the past little while. Now expect him to probably play next year in the AHL, and then I think after next year, he should definitely have a shot at the NHL roster. So, I mean, adding Struble to a decor that has good young players like Justin Barron, Caden Gooley, Jordan Harris, Arbor Xhekaj. I mean, that Canadiens blue line is loaded with good quality prospects who should be NHL players in the next year or two. So, really great to see Struble sign his entry-level contract, and I'm expecting to continue to do really well with the Canadiens. So, really good to see all these guys sign. Like I said, good to see Struble sign, so especially to see him finally get an opportunity in the next couple of seasons with the Canadiens. But also good to see Alsher in Florida and Kaiser and Rolston in Chicago get the entry-level contracts and have them take their next step to being good NHL players. Now that's all the signs we want to get to. Before I get to the injury updates, just want to quickly update that there have been a couple of eliminations in the standings as of right now, plus the team has clinched a playoff berth. Now the Boston Bruins are having a really historic season and one of the better seasons we've seen in the last 20-30 years, have already clinched a playoff spot, currently leading the league, probably will win the President's Trophy. So it's good to see the Bruins get there. I know I was one who thought they would probably miss the playoffs this year, but they've definitely proven everyone wrong and have definitely had a dominant season this year. So good to see Boston get into the playoffs. There have also been 4 eliminations, as the Columbus Blue Jackets in the East and the Anaheim Ducks, Chicago Blackhawks, and San Jose Sharks in the West have all been eliminated from playoff contention. So there's no more hope for playoffs for those 4 teams. The Jackets have not done overly well, being riddled with injuries, while the Ducks, Sharks, and Hawks are all in the midst of rebuild. So we'll get to the Sharks and Hawks later in this video, as that's sort of what I want to talk about toward the end of this video. But it's not great to see these teams miss the playoffs, as the Hawks, Sharks, and Ducks are probably expected given the fact they're in rebuilds and no one really thought they would be doing bad. But I think the fact that the Jackets are eliminated this early is a bit of a surprise. But when you look at how many injuries they've had, I don't think it's too much of a surprise. So Jackets, Sharks, Ducks, Hawks gone from playoff contention and have been eliminated. As for the other side, Bruins have clinched, and I expect a lot more teams to be clinched and eliminated in the coming days and weeks leading up to the NHL playoffs. Next, we'll go over to the injury update part of the video. We'll start with the Arizona Coyotes. Now, Arizona has dealt with a couple of injuries, but they haven't been too long-term injuries, as Patrick Nemeth, who had suffered an undisclosed injury, and Christian Fischer, who has suffered a lower body injury, were both out for only a game due to those injuries and have gone back into game action. So good to see neither of those two guys stay out for too long. Nemeth is a really good third pair defenseman in his first season with Arizona. Fischer's a really good top 9 forward. So to see those two not be out for too long for the Arizona Coyotes due to injuries is good, and I expect them to continue to do really well for Arizona. Schmaltz had a lower body injury as well and has also come back from that. It took him about a week to get back from injury, so he wasn't as quick as Nemeth or Fischer were to get back from those injuries. But still, he wasn't out for an overly long period of time, and he was able to get back into game action. So good to see Schmaltz get back. He's a really big piece of that top 6 for Arizona and one of the leaders of that team. So good to see him get back into game action. As for Josh Brown on the defensive end, he's suffered an undisclosed injury and is out day to day right now, so not great news. Brown's a good third pair 7th defenseman who's been in and out of the lineup for the Arizona Coyotes this year, so hopefully he's not out for too long. But once again, with Arizona not competing for a playoff spot and the Arizona Coyotes probably wanting to get some more younger players in the lineup, I don't think it's too concerning to have Brown out for the next couple of games. So good to see Schmaltz, Fischer, Nemeth get back, and good to see that their injuries were not too long-term, but not great to see Brown go down with an injury, and hopefully he can get back in the next game or two for Arizona. Over with Buffalo, they've had a couple of players coming off of injury and a couple of players suffering injuries. For coming off of injuries, Dahlin, who had an upper body injury, and Alex Tuch, who had a lower body injury, have both returned from their injuries. Now, Tuch was out about a couple of weeks due to his injury. Wasn't the greatest without Tuch. Tuch's a really good top 6 forward for the Buffalo Sabres, but to see him get back in game action is really good. He should be slotted right back onto that top line with Skinner and Thompson and do really well. So good to see Tuch get back. As for Dahlin, he was only out for a day due to his upper body injury, so good to see him not miss too much time due to that injury. He's their best defenseman and one of the better defensemen in the NHL. So good to see Dahlin get back, and hopefully he can continue to help the Sabres push for a playoff spot. As for their injuries, Matthias Samuelsson has suffered upper body injury, Eric Comrie has suffered a lower body injury, and they're both out week to week right now. So the Sabres have some good goaltending depth this year. They still have Craig Anderson, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. So with those two guys, it's not overly concerning to have Comrie out. It is definitely a bit of a blow to the Sabres' depth in net, but definitely I think they can make do for the next week or two without Comrie until he gets back. So not great for the Sabres, especially with there still being a slight chance that they could be pushing for a playoff spot, but still not overly concerning. And I think this injury should just give Pekka Luukkonen and Anderson more playing time for now. As for Samuelsson, he's been definitely in and out of the lineup this year due to injuries, so not good to see him out week to week. Hopefully it's not too severe and he's back within the next week, but it could be longer. So the Sabres are going to have to make do without Samuelsson for a time being, which isn't overly ideal given the fact he's really turned into a great top four defenseman, but they're just going to have to make do without it. So hopefully Samuelsson and Comrie can get back in the not too distant future and return to game action before the Sabres season ends and help them continue their push for a playoff spot. But good to see Dahlin and Tuch get back into game action. Next, with the Chicago Blackhawks, they've had a few injury updates, as Peter Mrazek has an undisclosed injury and is going to be out for an unknown period of time. And Cole Gutman, who was a good call-up about a couple of weeks ago, has suffered a shoulder injury and is going to be out for the next 4 months. So for Mrazek, not great news to see him go down with an injury. They have a lot of good goaltenders, like as we've seen this year. Stauber and Soderblom have done really well coming into the lineup if need be. They got Hudobin at the deadline from Dallas, and they still have Stalock. So I think with the Hawks eliminated, not pushing for a playoff spot, they can run with a couple of other guys for now with Mrazek injured. So I don't think it's too significant of an injury for the Hawks, but it's definitely a big blow to their goaltending core to lose their starting goaltender for now, and hopefully Mrazek's back in the near future. As for Gutman, he came in as their second-line center for the Hawks, and he's actually done quite well. He hasn't been a great point producer, but for his first few games in the NHL, he's definitely done well. But he suffered a shoulder injury. He's going to be out for the next 4 months. So with the Hawks eliminated, that puts him out for the rest of the season. That puts him out until somewhere around mid to late July. So he should be ready for training camp and should have a decent shot to make the NHL roster next year. But just definitely a bad blow for Gutman, who was having a really good showing at the NHL level. So hopefully Gutman can recover and be ready for training camp next year and try and push for a roster spot. But not good news to see him go down with a shoulder injury. And Mrazek, not overly ideal to lose him. But with their other goaltenders they have, I think they should make do. So not great news, and hopefully Mrazek can get back in the near future. Next with the Dallas Stars, they've had a couple of injuries, as Luke Glendening came back from his injury and has returned to game action, but Mason Marchment is going to be out for a long period of time due to an injury. Now for Glendening, he had missed just under a month due to an undisclosed injury, and that had kept him out for a while. So great news to see him get back into game action. He's a really good bomb 6-4, can help on the penalty kill. Really good player for the Dallas Stars, so hopefully he's not too rusty given the fact he was out for a month, and he can get right back into game action and be a really good, strong bomb 6-4 for the Stars. And they're going to need it, as Mason Marchment has suffered a knee injury that's going to keep him out for the next 4 weeks. So keeping him out for the next month, that's probably going to give him a timeline around the start of the playoffs, maybe just after the start of the playoffs. So not great news. Marchment has definitely been in a scoring slump as of late, not really producing very many points in the past couple games, but still, he's a really good middle 6-4, and I think having him for the playoffs would be really great. So to possibly lose him for at least the start of the playoffs is not overly ideal for the Stars. They'll have to call upon guys like new acquisitions Domi and Dadonov to sort of replace Marchment's spot, but definitely not great news to see Marchment go down. Hopefully he can be back before the start of the playoffs, but it does seem like it's looking like he will be out to start the playoffs. And it's good to see Glendening back into the NHL roster for the Dallas Stars. And lastly here with the Philadelphia Flyers, they've gotten a couple of guys back, as Wade Allison and Brendan Lemieux both suffered undisclosed injuries and were out day to day, but they've both come back. Lemieux only missed a couple of games due to the injury. Allison missed about a week. So both of them were not out for overly long period of time. Allison's a good third-line forward. Lemieux, who was acquired just before the deadline from LA, is a good fourth-line forward. So good to see both of these guys get back. The Flyers are definitely not in a spot right now for contending in the playoffs. So once again, it's not really too significant to get these guys back. But to get Allison back, who's good, young top 9 forward, is great. And to get Lemieux back in the game action is also good. So good to see these two get back in the game action. And hopefully Philadelphia can continue to play well towards the end of the season. Now that's all the injury updates I want to talk about for today. Next, we'll go over to the trade rumor part of the video. But instead, we're going to make this the off-season rumor part of the video. Now, over the next couple of videos, I'll probably talk about some of the teams who have been eliminated from playoff contention and what they could do in the off-season. I'll definitely have a more in-depth blog post about this in probably a couple days, maybe a week. But for now, I just want to talk about how the Chicago Blackhawks and the San Jose Sharks could improve in the offseason and what sort of players could be on the trade block come the offseason. Now, for the Chicago Blackhawks, they were the second team in the West and the third team period to be eliminated. So not great news, but I don't think this comes as much surprise as the Hawks are a rebuilding team. Now, if you look at their stats for the season so far, their defense hasn't been overly bad. Guys like Mrazek, Stalock, Stauber, Soderblom have done okay in net. And their defense, with veterans like Seth Jones, Connor Murphy, Jake McCabe before he was traded, had made that defense really good. But they're dead last in the scoring race. So definitely, scoring has been the Hawks' problem this year. If you look at their offense, it was really headlined by Taves, Domi, and Kane. Besides Taves, Domi, and Kane, there was not really much offense coming from elsewhere. You had a couple of other good guys like Seth Jones, Taylor Radish, Andreas Athanasiou, who did okay putting up some points for the Hawks, but literally it was basically Kane and Domi putting up points for the Hawks. And now that both those guys are gone and Taves is out for most likely the season due to his illness, it's quite possible that the Hawks will finish dead last in scoring, and that offense just doesn't look really good. So if I'm looking in the offseason, possible trade chips for the Hawks, I'm looking at Connor Murphy. There was a lot of talk about him being traded before the deadline. I think he could definitely be a player that's moved in the offseason. I think he still has like 3 or 4 years left on his deal at $4.5 million, so it'd definitely be a difficult move to make, but I think the Hawks would definitely consider it. Another one would be Taylor Radish. Radish was a really good top 6 forward this year. There was some rumblings towards the end of the trade line that he could be a guy who the Hawks wind up moving. I think, given the fact he still has a year left after this year, cost controlled at a very, very low cap hit, and then he's at RFA, there would be a ton of teams interested in a good middle 6 forward like Radish. So definitely be interesting to see. I think we should definitely keep an eye on Murphy and Radish. They definitely have a lot of pending unrestricted free agents, like Andreas Athanasiou, Anton Hudobin, Alex Stalock. So there's definitely a couple of UFAs out there. There's also a good amount of RFAs they have for this season, but no significant ones. I would think that maybe a couple of guys like a Khrushchev or Ian Mitchell could probably be re-signed. And on top of that, maybe some of those deadline acquisitions like Anders Bjork and Austin Wagner, I could see them also staying with the Blackhawks given the fact that they'll have more than enough opportunity with the Chicago organization. But I think for the offseason, their goal should definitely be to try and improve that offense. I'll expect if they can sign him, a guy like Frank Nazar, maybe give Lucas Reichel, and whoever they get with their top 5 pick, if it's not Matvei Michkov, who's still signed in Russia, if they get like a Leo Carlson or Adam Fantilli, I think those 3 guys, Reichel, Nazar, and whoever they get with their first round pick this year should definitely be inserted into their lineup. I think the Hawks need some more good youth into this organization. If you look at the teams who have done rebuilds over the past few years, Buffalo moved their big players like Eichel, Ristolainen, Reinhart a couple of off seasons ago. Last year surprised a lot of people by doing okay. And then this year, they are pushing for a playoff spot, even though they're most likely not going to get in. Arizona started their rebuild a couple of years ago. They did dead last in the season last year. They continued to get picks and prospects. They got some more young bodies into the lineup. And they're surprising a couple of teams, not being a very low bomb dweller in the NHL season this year. So I think the Hawks are sort of along that timeline. I think they've already started their rebuild. They're going to be pretty much dead last this year. And I think if they can do well, get some more younger bodies in, I think they could be the Arizona Coyotes of next year, where they're not dead last in the NHL, and they're not competing for a playoff spot, but they're somewhere in the middle, and they're showing signs of improvement. So I think if they can get some of these younger guys into the roster, they should definitely be really good. And I think they're probably going to have to use their cap space to their advantage, as they only have $43 million dollars on their books right now, and most of that's tied up with Connor Murphy, Peter Mrazek, Nikita Zaitsev, Seth Jones, and Tyler Johnson. Those 5 players make up a majority of next year's cap hit, so I think they're going to have to try and either sign or trade for a couple of decent contracts. I think they could definitely do a couple of signings that they did with Anthony Ciuandomi, where they signed 1-year cheap deals to move for the offseason. Or they could use their cap space to take on bad contracts for picks and prospects. But I definitely think the Hawks are going to be an interesting team to see in the offseason, as I think they could be a little bit active in the trade market, using their cap space for picks and prospects to take on bad contracts. But I definitely also think they could be a decent team in free agency. And I think they have to probably sign or trade for at least 2 or 3 more top 9 forwards to have a decent NHL team next year. But I definitely think if they can get guys like Reichel, Nazar, whoever they draft in the first round this year, NHL playing time next year, I think this team could definitely do really good. So not good to see them be eliminated, but I think this team has a bright future ahead of them in Chicago. And finally, with the San Jose Sharks, they were the first team to be eliminated, period, in the NHL. In the entire league, the Sharks were the first team to be eliminated. So not great news for the Sharks. This is definitely a start of a rebuild. We saw them move Brent Burns in the offseason. That I think signaled that they're going to start trying to move as many pieces as they could. The big move in season was they moved Meyer to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for a first, a second, and a couple of good prospects like Zetterlund and Mukami Ledin. But definitely, I think this is just a start. And the Sharks didn't really do well this year. So they were okay on the goal scoring. I think Erik Karlsson's outstanding season has helped that, as they're only 9th lowest in scoring right now. But on the defensive group, they're second last in the NHL. So the defense hasn't really done overly well. They've definitely gotten some good goal scoring, and I think Meyer, before he was traded, and Karlsson's outstanding season have helped that. But I definitely think that the D-core definitely needs to improve, needs some more experience on that blue line. So definitely watch out for the Sharks to be an active team to try and rework the blue line. I think a guy like Karlsson is probably going to be dealt in the offseason. Definitely going to be a difficult contract to move. I think he has like 4 years left at $11.5 million. So not an overly easy contract to move. But I think given the fact that Karlsson was really talked about before the deadline, I think there's a huge possibility that the Karlsson gets moved before the start of next year. I wonder if there was a team out there that the Sharks could try and move Marc-Edouard Vlasic to. I think Vlasic's another possible buyout candidate. It wouldn't save them much cap space in year 2 and 3 of the buyout, but I definitely think it could be a possibility. But if they don't want to go the buyout route, I wonder if they maybe move him to a team with some cap space, like Arizona, Anaheim, Chicago, to try and get some more cap space. I know the Sharks are trying to go through a retool. Maybe they keep Vlasic as like their veteran defenseman, but I would definitely think Vlasic is going to be a name to watch in the offseason. A couple names up front to watch. Logan Couture. We know that they're trying to move out some more high-priced veterans. Couture is signed for the next, I think, 4 or 5 seasons at $8 million. So the Sharks should probably have to eat some salary on that deal to make it work. But I think Couture is like a second-line center on a team who looks to be a cup contender. Could definitely be good. And I think Couture is definitely going to have to be a name we watch in the offseason. A couple of lower-end names will be like a Kevin Labanc or an Alex Barabanov, who will both be entering the final year of their deals. Labanc's actually not done half bad this year, and Barabanov's still done really well. They're both really good middle six forwards, so definitely watch out for one of those two to be moved. Would Kaapo Kähkönen in net be moved? He's a really good young goalie who's going to be a UFA at the end of, not this offseason, but the next one. So it's going to be really interesting to see, but I think Kähkönen's another name who could definitely be moved. So I think the Sharks are definitely going to be a very busy team in the offseason. They're probably going to get another top 5 pick. Wouldn't surprise me if they got first overall in Bedard, which would be a really big win for San Jose. And I think getting some more younger players into the lineup would be good for the Sharks. They have a guy like William Eklund and Thomas Bordeleau, who I think will definitely get NHL roster spots next year. I could even see a guy like Weisblatt or a Coe also get in the forward group. They definitely don't have as deep of a team on the blue line, and I think that's probably something that they'll probably want to address if they're moving a guy like Erik Karlsson or maybe a Marc-Edouard Vlasic, trying to acquire some more younger defensemen who can play with like a Mario Ferraro. So I definitely think that the Sharks are going to be an interesting team. I think this team could definitely look a lot different than it does right now as the season ends, but definitely keep an eye out for like a Labanc, Barabanov, possibly a Couture. Erik Karlsson's definitely a name that's out there, I think. Kaapo Kähkönen, Marc-Edouard Vlasic, maybe. I even say there's a possibility that a guy like Mario Ferraro could be dealt. Probably a couple of other smaller names as well in San Jose, but I definitely think there's a lot of possibilities out there for the Sharks. The Sharks already have a $63 million cap hit for next year, so if they move a guy like Erik Karlsson and maybe a couple of other guys, they're going to need to replace them with some of the veterans, so I definitely could see them go out and acquire maybe a veteran or two via the free agency, or maybe they try and make a trade for a couple of young players who have some decent contracts. But definitely, I think Sharks and Hawks are definitely going to be two interesting teams to watch out for in the offseason. Like I said, the Hawks have a very low cap hit. I don't expect them to use their cap space to get bad contracts, sign a couple free agents that they could possibly trade in next year's trade line, try and get some more youth into that lineup, and try and push for having a better year next year. Sharks, I think they're still going to try and move out some of their big contracts off the books, try and rework that blue line, maybe their goaltending as well, to try and be a bit more competitive next year. But I think both of these teams are going to have some busy off seasons, and both teams will try and infuse more young talent into their lineups before the start of next year. But I'd like to hear your thoughts. What do you think the Hawks and Sharks could do in the offseason? Does Erik Karlsson get moved? Do the Hawks try and use some of their cap space to get picks and prospects with taking on bad contracts? Does Reichel or maybe possibly Nazar, if he signs, get into the lineup? Does Eklund and Bordelot and San Jose get into the lineup? I would definitely like to hear your thoughts on what the San Jose Sharks and the Chicago Blackhawks could do. And definitely, when I finish the blog post discussing the Hawks and Sharks could possibly do before the deadline, I'll leave a link to that in the description below when I finish that. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video and subscribe. I also do a blog, which I will leave a link to that in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.